Good morning. We are at Korth Park this morning in Jefferson County. This is a prairie, kind of a managed prairie. It's a county park, so really managed for hiking trails, but they've done a good job with the prairie out here. It is the middle of June and we've got a good number of plants flowering right now. Maybe I'll start you off with a flowering grass. So grass is not often something you see in flower, or maybe you've never noticed plants, grass plants flowering before. There we go, get it in frame. This one is a grass called brome, genus is bromus, and kind of conveniently there are bright yellow anthers on here. So grasses are wind pollinated, and as they let their pollen go, they've got these anthers that are sort of hinged in the middle, and the anthers rock back and forth and release the pollen. So as the wind blows more, they rock more. So they're really built to release more pollen as the wind blows. I don't know if you can quite see it as well. Also buried in here are some fuzzy white bits coming out. I'm sort of highlighting some with the tip of my thumb here. Those are not accidental. Those are actually the stigmas. So we have flowers here with male parts and female parts. The anthers stick out and release their pollen, and the stigmas stick out and collect the pollen. And so everything's pretty well hidden. The flowers themselves, we can talk about later, are highly modified in grasses. So they're reduced, they're kind of simplified down. They've got these single flower structures that basically a couple of modified leaves clamp down in sort of like a crab's claw fashion and conceal them. So they're pretty well hidden unless you want to dissect them to help identify a plant. But when it comes to actually reproducing, getting their pollen out and received, then this is something that they have to stick their reproductive parts out to do that. A good number of these in here. This is looks like smooth brome, bromus inermis, and not one of our native plants. In fact, kind of a troublesome plant in grasslands like this, but flowering in a good example there. We've got our blue jacket here, pretty common one you're going to see on a few of these field trips. Tradescantia ohiensis. This is a monocot. If you didn't see the flowers, you might think we've got more of a grass here with these long linear parallel veined leaves. The flowers are very monocot, so 3 petals there, and multiples of 3 for other parts as well. So we've got these bright yellow anthers. Interesting feature about these is that the filaments, the part of the stamen that leads to the anther, filaments are very fuzzy. And so, I don't know, one thing you might want to use to identify these. Lots of flowers in here. They don't open for very long at a time, so any one flower is open for a day. And then back here we've got, looks like a lot of spent flowers, maybe some buds of flowers yet to open, maybe for tomorrow. All right, let's see what else we can find in flower here. Not a lot of flowers just yet. Some other grasses. We've got some daisy fleabane here. There's a rigeron, maybe a rigeron strigosus there. In the daisy family, so flower head with lots of little flowers making up what looks like a flower or a pseudo flower. This is a common plant. We'll probably see flowering before the course is over. This is our common milkweed, Asclepias syriaca. Milkweed's pretty easy to identify, so big elliptical to ovate leaves with pinnate venation opposite along the stem, a little bit fuzzy to the touch. Flowers are going to emerge in these humble kind of firework clusters of flowers, pretty distinctive all around. And then of course, as a milkweed, it gets its name because it has this milky sap, which is a little bit toxic. And milkweeds are a favorite food of larval monarch butterflies, and they do that, or they prefer this plant because they are specialized to eat it, and not a lot of animals are successful at eating this plant. We've got a nice example over here of A little bit of animal ecology. This is one of our goldenrods, and along the stem we've got a swollen part here. This is the result of an insect, I believe it's a fly, creating a structure called a gall. So they, oh, look at that. I don't think I usually get them at this time of development. So the adult will sort of sting the plant to cause it to create this little tumor type of structure, and then lay an egg in there. So simultaneously the insect, the parent, has created some food for their offspring and some shelter also. So I've kind of ruined this animal's chance in here of making it through the year, but plenty of others to make up for this one. We'll see probably some other examples of galls as we go along. Some other grasses in here. So we saw the brome, this one. Might be another brome. All right, so another couple of prairie plants out here. This is one not native, but I don't know, not terribly troublesome, and some people are actually putting this on purpose in their prairies. This is one of our penstemons, foxglove beard tongue. So genus is Penstemon digitalis. This one's got opposite leaves and bilaterally symmetrical flowers. This is in the family Plantaginaceae, and I think that's one of the easier ways to identify this. This is this plant belongs to a group of plants that have sort of similar bilaterally symmetrical flowers. Kind of looks a little bit like a mouth, so this creates a little bit of a entry chamber for a pollinator like a bee that would crawl in there. On the bottom, this part that's called the beard tongue, that's what gives this the name. That is the style and stigma, and then you can also make out some anthers in there, black. So this plant has some pollen to give and pollen to receive, as many flowers would. Field clover, nothing's too special about this one. This is Trifolium pratense. Trifolium refers to our trifoliolate leaves. So you're probably familiar with clovers, three-parted compound leaves, alternate leaves, big stipules on here. So that white part in there is flared out into two stipules that would have been kind of clasping the stem a little bit. Let's see, while I'm talking about this one, there's a relative that is, I'd say maybe commonly thought of as a clover, but this one is actually in a different genus. This is in the genus called Medicago. They call this one black medic. So I don't have good flowers on here, but it has yellow flowers in a sort of raceme head, very much like a clover. There's some little features, if you were to key this out, some minor features that would help you identify it as a group that's not technically clover. So it's not trifolium, even though it has trifoliolate leaves. Medicago black medic. All right, so we've got an exciting prairie plant here. This is a plant that is dioecious. So we have a plant here that is male, and I'll show you another plant later that is female. So dioecious plants, the whole plant is male or female, meaning that male plants make only male flowers. Male flowers are defined as having only stamens, only functioning stamens, and not functioning carpels or ovaries, etc. And let's look at that. So just some generals about the species first. We're going to see two plants that look quite different from each other, but just bear in mind that the two plants I'm going to show you are, let's see, they're going to be similar in their foliage and different in their reproductive structures. So to start off, I've got a big compound leaf here, multiply compound, so it kind of flares out at the base. Tells us that that's actually the technical leaf base here. Compound first, pinnately compound, you can see some branching off the middle main vein there, And then off of this side vein, we've got another level of compound, so second order compound here, and actually a third order compound where those leaflets are again compound. This is the genus Thalictrum. We have a few of these, and the one's called meadow rue like this. There's also a few of those. This one, I think, there's one that's got a little bit more pointy leaflet tips. This one I think is Thalictrum daisy carp. I'm gonna have to look that one up, sorry. All right, so compound leaves alternate along the stem, kind of flared out sheathing leaf bases. Lots of flowers. So one thing we often see in dioecious plants is that they are, this one is wind pollinated, so I guess that's influence. A lot of our wind pollinated plants are dioecious. Maybe I should say a lot of our dioecious plants are wind pollinated. So dioecy is a good way to prevent yourself from pollinating yourself because it's physically impossible. So as a male plant, this one's gone all in on producing male reproductive structures. You can just see this shake with all these loose anthers. In fact, even the stamens are kind of falling off. So any one flower, this is in the buttercup family, Ranunculaceae. Buttercup family plants are known to have lots of stamens per flower, and sure enough, we have that. So I have got 3 big open flowers here, and each one of those just 20 or more stamens each. Big stamens, big investment in the anthers, so lots of pollen production even per flower. And then after that, just big pollen production because of the number of flowers on here. All right, so we're gonna do a little walk over to the female version of this species. So for a species to be dioecious and successfully produce seeds, for fertilization to happen, we've got to have a male and female close enough that pollination can happen. So it's a little bit of a trade-off. There's a nice advantage to not fertilizing yourself, but there's a little bit of a risk in risking that you might not get pollinated if you don't have a partner nearby. All right, so just another, I've grabbed a leaf that seems to have been maybe chewed a little bit here, but just at the base you can see a lot of similarities. So compound again in multiple orders. Those leaves with the pointed leaf tips, they're kind of thick, a little bit thicker than I might expect on a plant like this. So features that would help you identify it to species. And then just getting in on the flowers. So this is, again, buttercup family, also known to have lots of carpels. So separate carpels. Let me try to get us a smaller number of flowers here. All right. Whoopsies. Here we've got 3 flowers. And not much to it. There's a little bit of perianth at the bottom of the flowers, but mostly this is carpels with those big stigmas. So big stigmas we saw on the grass. Also big stigmas to catch pollen off the wind. Same thing here, big stigmas increase the surface area to collect pollen. Each one of these carpels has the ability to grab one pollen grain for a pollination event, and their fruits develop into achenes. So each flower, multiple carpels, each carpel can develop into its own fruit. There's a couple plants I can identify in their vegetative state here, or at least a couple worth noticing. One is a grapevine in the genus Vitis, and grape leaves have pretty distinctive appearance. So toothed along the margins and then lobed. This one's kind of loosely lobed into 3 big lobes. You see other members of the group it's being a little bit more lobed. And this one is just a field growing plant, sort of an opportunist. So when I see them in the field, I don't typically see anything reproductive on these. I think they may have an ability to sense that they're low on the ground. They don't really stand a good chance of getting pollinated or having their fruits be noticed by dispersing animals. So they're just sort of biding their time here, maybe until something comes along that they can grow up. They have tendrils, and this time of year, a really nice time to see tendrils. They're just in this really juicy state. They're doing their work right now. Later in the year, these tendrils will sort of dry up and harden as they become more woody. But right now, you can almost just see them working. So tendrils have the ability to sense that they're touching something, and then the plant responds by growing around it. So you see we've made some coils around these dead grass stalks in here, and the tendrils come out opposite of a leaf. So we've got leaf here, axillary bud already growing out there, and then opposite of that leaf is the tendril. Tendrils, kind of curiously, are actually modified inflorescences, or they're located at the same place of inflorescences that might happen maybe later on in the growth of the same plant, or at least in some plants of this species. Some others to see in this vicinity, we've got a group of plants here that are pretty distinctive for having leaf bases. So this plant has opposite leaves, and the leaf bases grow together. So this is not too common. They call that being parafoliate, if you wanted a technical term. This is one called cup plant. It's in a genus that we have a few prairie representatives of called Silphium in the sunflower family. So these are going to flower much later in the year. I don't suspect we'll see them during the time of this course. One thing that I kind of notice about Silphium plants is that they are a little rougher to the touch. So you can even hear in the audio I'm making some sandpapery sounds with this. This particular species doesn't get too big. This one's called Silphium integrifolium, referring to the leaves being attached together. There's a little bit of ecology here. So these leaves catch rainwater, and we've actually got a little spider in there. I don't know if you could see. Let's hope so. So while on the subject of Silphium, I see other members of the same genus here, and I can point those out and maybe reinforce what I said about them being rough. So another kind, we have a couple of kinds of Silphium that have their leaves mostly at the base. So this is one called Silphium laciniatum. Laciniatum refers to the sort of fringed cut of the leaves. This one's called compass plant, and it's going to have a big stalk of flowers, flower heads later in the year. Pretty distinctive, very large if you can tell here. So large and stiff, again, kind of sandpapery leaves. We are hitting the Silphium jackpot here. So here's another one. This is another Silphium. So we're not going to see any flowers, but just maybe highlighting some similarities in the genus. Hairy, kind of sandpapery. This one, opposite leaves, but not doing that cup feature. So mostly opposite. There, those look better. Better opposite leaves there. This is Silphium integrifolium. Is that what I said about the other one? I'll get the names right on the back end. This one is called rosinweed. And I did see one more. There's sort of just a group of these Silphiums that are obviously all related, and then ones you tend to see showing up in prairies. Last one here is called prairie dock, and it's got a really long scientific name, Silphium terebinthinaceum. Sandpapery, a little bit kind of cool to the touch, has been pointed out. These plants have really deep root systems, and so they draw water from lower in the ground. And so on a hot day, if you touch the leaves, you can kind of get the feeling for that water. The leaves are losing water as they breathe, and losing water that started out a lot cooler than the air around us. So just kind of an interesting feature. So we got 4 Silphium species, and I hardly had to walk anywhere to get them. Maybe one more while we're in the grass here. This is one that has flowered early in the year. This is a member of the carrot family. This one's called Golden Alexanders. It had yellow flowers, as you might guess, and now we're moving on to some fruits that are kind of like nuts. In the carrot family, we've got the umbel inflorescence, compound umbel. So this is the first umbel branch, and then it's also an umbel of umbels, as these little bits are also umbels. Quite a few members of the carrot family. They have hollow, round stems, big sheathing leaf bases. So this is the base of a leaf, compound leaves. One thing about Golden Alexanders, they tend to be a little bit more I guess, more entire leaflets than divided, if you compare something like a wild carrot. Something to watch out for. This is a little bit, I guess maybe an amateur or novice would get this maybe mixed up with one of our dangerous plants, the wild parsnip. So wild parsnip has leaflets that are much more rounded, I think. Wild parsnip is a larger plant overall, so it shouldn't really be in trouble of getting those mixed up, but just one to watch out for in general. We've got another member of the bean family here. This is actually in the same genus as black medic. So this is Medicago, and this is one that might be familiar to you. This is alfalfa. So a lot of similarities to what we saw in the clovers. So three-parted trifoliolate leaves, stipule at the base. These are alternate along the stem. The inflorescence is kind of modeled on a raceme, although kind of densely packed into a head, very similar to what you see in a clover. If you get in on detail on these, you can see they're very bean-like, so that big standard petal sticking up, keel coming out. These are kind of on the large side. On the clovers, they're kind of hard to see, but this one's showing its flowers pretty nicely. Interesting changes in color. This can happen sometimes to signal to pollinators what's going on as far as flowers that are open and ready to distribute pollen versus some that might not quite be ready. And pollinators, of course, key into this very nicely. They're quite in tune to where their food comes from. So as flowers get older, the older ones are lower down and they're turning more pale white. And the newer ones closer to the top, more dark purple. Really a lovely dark purple, kind of stands out to you in the field. So this is Medicago lupulina, the alfalfa. So here's a grass worth noticing. This is one called Timothy. You might be familiar with. So a lot of our grasses have more loose inflorescence. This one has just a fuzzy spike inflorescence. As you'd identify this as a grass with the leaves with the loose sheaths, ligule present on there. And then really the best way to confirm that you've got a grass is to look individually at the flowers or the florets. And this might not come through, okay, might not come through super well. I see some on here. So one of the appearances that you might go for to identify Timothy, Phleum pratense, is that it's got this so two-parted flower, which we see in the grasses, but it kind of looks a little more like a, I don't know, like a jabby weapon kind of thing. So it's got two pointed extensions to the leaves, the palea and the lemma that are surrounding the flower. We've got a plant in here that's quite common in more like weedy environments, just sort of an opportunist plant, very successful grower in lots of different environments. This is yarrow, Achillea millefolium, and the millefolium of the name refers to literally thousands of leaves, or maybe thousands of leaflets. So they have these very feathery leaves. If you wanted to verify an identification, they also have a nice smell to them when you crush them up. Leaves are alternate along the stem, and this plant is in the sunflower family. The flower heads are white all around, but you can see some differentiation between the ray florets and the disc florets. So let me get one of these here. So there we go. So the disc florets are doing the bulk of the reproduction there, and the ray florets are on the outside, those bigger petals, better for attraction. So that's the flower top of an Achillea plant. Pretty distinctive. Here's one more in the bean family. We've seen a few of these now that have trifoliolate leaves. So here we go. Leaves are not really all that different between quite a few of these that we've seen. So we're sort of looking for the overall habit of the plant, the color of the flowers can be pretty helpful, and just the arrangement of flowers. So in this one we've got more of an extended raceme. The bean-like flowers you can probably see on there. So a little bit more maybe aspect pointed downwards. Still have that banner at the top, and then the keel as part of the flower. This one is, it's called the sweet clover. We have two of these that are actually differentiated just on their flower color. So this is Mellilotus officinalis, and the other one with the white flowers is Mellilotus alba. Sometimes you see them growing together. They're quite similar except for that flower color. Nice illustration here of the flowers also as they're developing. So older flowers at the bottom and then flower buds as we move to the top of this long inflorescence. That's something we don't often see in the bean family in Wisconsin here. Here we've got a member of the sunflower family. This is an echinacea. This is the pale purple cone flower. And very distinctive. These are quite large, so I'll put one up next to my hand here. The ray florets around the outside in this species, not super showy, so they're quite small, narrow. And then of course the business of the flower is in the disc here in the center, quite a few flowers in there. In this case, not yet open. We're still kind of early season for this plant. Very hairy along this is the peduncle, the stalk leading to the inflorescence. A little side shot of that. Echinacea is related to the word for spiny, or based on that word. So you might know about echinoderms. This one has within its inflorescence just kind of a stiff, spiky feel to it. And those spikes kind of persist as this develops into fruit as well. The bean family hits keep coming. This is another one. We just keep building up more of these examples of bean family Fabaceae plants. So we've already got some prairie clover, the Trifolium pratense over here. And then in this area, this is a new genus. This is a genus called Lotus. Lotus corniculatus, the birdfoot trefoil. Trefoil is based out of French origin, and that's trefoil, 3 leaves, basically, from the French. So again, leaflets divided into 3s. Some really prominent stipules. I think you'd be forgiven for thinking that those were yet another version of the compound leaves. So I think these qualify as actually stipules at the base, and then 3 leaflets around the leaf blade proper. Very nice. This is quite large examples of bean flowers, similar to the size of like a garden pea, kind of sprayed out in a about like an umbel, so heading out in all directions, bilaterally symmetrical, so sort of offering a buffet of flowers to pollinators. This one's not native, tends to be a little weedy, but also very attractive plant. The birdfoot part of its name, birdfoot trefoil, refers to when these flowers go to develop into fruits. The fruits are long legumes, and they kind of look like an extended animal's foot. Going to try to get some footage here of pollination without disturbing our friend the bumblebee here. So bumblebee on a field clover, Trifolium pratense. Bumblebees and bees in general are very specialized on flowers for getting their food source. So bees make use of nectar, also quite often make use of pollen as a food. They have a behavior where they sort of deliberately attack or sample the flowers on an inflorescence, and then they move to the next plant of that species. They've got a good memory for where they've been, for visiting the same kinds of flowers, for basically getting what they need out of flowers in a short amount of time. So this is a workhorse of an animal, very good at getting resources from flowers, and also from the flowers perspective, very effective at pollination. So this animal is visiting lots and lots of flowers of the same species. It's faithful to the same species. It's going to just move through this habitat, grabbing field clover pollen and just going from one plant to the next. Very effective there. I don't know if this is going to come through super well. I can tell it's not in focus right now. This is one of our potential pollinators, looks like a syrphid fly. There it goes. So these are flies. There's a couple of them here. Try to keep them in the center of the image. There we go. Looks like not super active at pollinating at the moment. Oh, got other things on our mind. Okay, we are having a romantic adventure. Sorry. Out of focus. There we go. All right, got bigger things on your mind than pollinating. You know what? Why don't we take our date to a flower and get some snack? All right, so these are flies that are marked to look like bees. Helps them to avoid predators. They look tougher than they are. They fly similar to bees. They pollinate flowers. They're flower visitors. And that coloration just helps them to avoid getting noticed, or avoid being seen as a viable food item. So while we're talking about bean family flowers and plants, I guess we should not ignore the one that's been under my feet as I walk along the path. So this is a path that gets mowed, and the mowing really enriches for plants that are what we think of more as our lawn weeds. And among those is another one of our members of the bean family. This is the Trifolium, shoot. Sorry, I'm gonna have to look that one up. Rapens, Trifolium rapens, the white clover. So this one has a creeping habit, helps it avoid lawnmowers. That's an adaptive strategy these days in a world where people mow their lawns. So if I kind of pick along the stem, I can get more of this plant out to show you. So a lot of this was right along the ground. Keeping that low profile keeps it from getting mowed down, which would be a problem for getting those flowers to survive. Bean family flowers, kind of a nice strategy here where the fresh flowers are upwards here, and then the spent flowers point down like that, so they're no longer needing to attract any pollinators down at the bottom, so they can switch gears and move on to developing fruits. Leaves long petioles, but also trifoliate like we've seen in the other members of the genus Trifolium and relatives. This would count as probably a rhizome, so more of a creeping stem, creeps along the ground to avoid detection by lawnmowers. Good example here of a plant in the genus Rumex or dock. This is a plant we have quite a few weeds. Some of these are fond of wetlands and pretty distinctive. It's in the family Polygonaceae, which we'll see other members of Polygonaceae. They have this feature where the leaf base surrounds the stem and grows up it for a little bit. A structure called an ochrea. Those tend to be kind of short-lived in this group. So you can already see this one. If you didn't know to look for it there, you probably might not see it. Just sort of a really faint sheath that's already degrading around the stem there. This, I think, is the curly dock, so named for its undulate leaf margins. The leaf margins have kind of grown bigger than the midrib would allow them to grow, so they sort of ran out of room to grow sideways, so they're kind of growing over themselves into this wavy pattern. Very distinctive, kind of a roughened feel. And then moving up, this one flowered earlier. It's already done flowering and moving on to fruiting. The fruits are just achenes, so little nuts, surrounded by this triangular arrangement of bracts. So very distinctive there. And also kind of reminds you of family Polygonaceae. Polygonaceae, referring to polygon or many-angled. I think it's meant to indicate like a zigzagging along the stem of some species, but I also think of it as this many-angled or three-angled fruits that we often see in Polygonaceae. Here's another set of flowering grasses. These are reed canary grass. We're closer to the water right now, so this kind of makes sense for a place for them to be. They like to grow around the water, but they're also not too picky about growing upland. And one thing to look for in reed canary grass is the leaves tend to really angle out like at right angles from the stem. So they're taking up a good amount of space as they grow sideways relative to the stem. We got some flowers with lots of anthers out. This one would give me a heck of a time with allergies. You can see there's just a little breeze blowing those anthers. You can see them moving in the breeze. The stigmas, I see a couple stigmas on here. They're kind of obscured. Sometimes we have plants that have different phases where they'll be in male phase first to release their pollen and then later shift over to female phase. That might be going on here. There's a little lawn weed here worth noticing. This is a plant in the mint family, Lamiaceae. And Lamiaceae has a couple features that help to identify it as a family. Has a square stem. This one's not terribly square as I roll it around in my fingers, but the square stem is also related to the opposite leaves. So we have opposite leaves with petioles, entire leaf blades, and then heading up to the top of this, very mint family flowers. So bilaterally symmetrical. And if you crush this, I think it's got a little bit of a scent. This one's called Prunella vulgaris, the self-heal. Pretty common. I think maybe what I look for this in this plant is this pretty dense cluster. We don't typically see like a fat cluster of flowers at the apex of a plant in Lamiaceae, but here we have it. Also pretty close to the ground, not a big plant. We've got here one of our invasive plants. This is the multiflora rose, Rosa multiflora. This is one I typically run into more in woods. We're still in full sun on a prairie habitat here. Multiflora rose, as you might guess, lots of flowers. So the inflorescence, here we've got a panicle of lots of flowers. A lot of our native rose species are just one flower at a time. Certainly a much smaller number of flowers at a time. So seeing this number of flowers might start getting you thinking about multiflora rose. Other features of roses. So we've got pinnately compound leaves with serrate leaflet margins. And then a thing to watch out for on the multiflora rose is that the stipule has kind of fringe extensions coming out from it. So that stipule appearance is one that you want to use looking for multiflora rose. In my experience, not one that you easily get confused with any native species or other rose species you would find. The habit's kind of scrambling like this. This is actually able to grow almost like a vine up other trees if we were in the woods. And then, of course, as a rose along the stem, these prickles are not really attached, so you can sort of push them off. That's not a good example. It's still kind of juicy. They're not going away. Anyway, they're just sort of irregular extensions along the stem. Certainly one to watch out for if you're in the woods. We've got one of our dogwood species here. Genus is Cornus, C-O-R-N-U-S. And this one was an early flowering species. We've already moved on to fruiting. So these are going to develop into some berries. Right now still green, but they're going to pick up some color as the season goes on. So a kind of a compact panicle or cyme here. Nothing too special about the berries. The leaves are pretty helpful. So the phyllotaxis and the leaves are very helpful when identifying dogwoods. Not all of our dogwoods have opposite leaves, but if you do see opposite leaves and opposite simple leaves, this might be a plant to start thinking about. This is one that typically shows up in wetlands. We've got a pretty good diversity of dogwoods. One thing that usually stands out for the dogwoods is their leaf venation. So the leaf venation is pinnate, but in the leaves, the veins do something that's a little unusual, where they leave the mid vein and then they start heading towards the apex. So they curve. They call that arcuate venation, and it's a good identifier for the dogwoods. One other to watch out for, if you see that kind of venation, we have it also in the common buckthorn, Rhamnus cathartica. Common buckthorn has serrate leaf margins. The margins in dogwoods are entire. Another useful thing you can do to identify a dogwood is to ever so gently break the leaf apart, and the veins have fibers in them that will hold the leaf up, even though I've severed all the blade, but I did it gently so I can hold on to those connecting tissues inside of the veins, and it'll actually hold up its own leaf using the strength of the fibers in the vein. So that's a good test for, I think, all of our dogwoods. So we're in a shaded area now. We're not too far from the lake shore, and getting a lot of shade from the trees in this area. And quite abundant in this local area is another member of the bean family. So we've got these pinnately compound leaves, a little bit of stipule at the base there, lots of leaflets, and with a terminal leaflet as well. That can be useful for identifying members of the bean family. Sometimes this terminal leaflet in our vetches, for example, turns into a tendril to help this plant climb, but this one doesn't have that tendril at the tip. It's got a lot of a scrambling habit. This one was a piece that was growing quite upright. Still a little bit early in the season. These are flower buds, flower buds, flower buds. Lower down here I've got one that is flowering. Similar to what we saw in the birdfoot trefoil, Lotus corniculatus, the color is pretty useful on this one. This one they call the crown vetch, also kind of calling to mind this circle of lovely flowers, about the size and shape of the birdfoot trefoil, but leaning much more to a pale pink color. This one is used to be called in the genus Coronilla, and now it's, I believe, Secarigera varia. It's not native and typically shows up on roadsides and other places where it has a chance to get established. Also in a pretty shaded area, we've got a shrub. A little hard to appreciate the whole shrub because we've got quite a few plants growing close together here. What you're looking at is my head height right now, so about 6 feet off the ground. Lots of plants growing in and among each other. So I'll show you this one. This is from a group of shrubs that have opposite leaves, opposite simple leaves, sometimes lobed. This one, I believe the leaves don't quite look like I'm used to, but I want to call this Viburnum dentatum. So this is a group of plants called the arrow woods. They have a flat-topped inflorescence. It looks very much like an umbel here. It doesn't always have that umbel look. So flat-topped cyme here, technically. 5-parted flowers. And it's really that opposite leaves that gets me thinking about this group of plants as far as shrubs. Moving over to another part here, this is one that's finished flowering, and moving on to developing some fruits there. You can see the fatter ovaries of those flowers. While I'm in here, also notice we've got some grapevine. So some other good examples of grapevine leaves, palmately veined, lobed to different degrees. And this one comes to mind, excuse me, because we've got the inflorescence here developing into fruits. So just like I mentioned before, the tendrils were opposite of leaves. Sorry, here's the leaf proper. This is a side shoot from the axillary bud. Here's the leaf. Opposite that leaf is this structure, which instead of being a tendril was flowers in an inflorescence and now developing into fruits. So members of the grape family, Vitis grapes. We don't get too many conifers in this course. This is a good example of a white pine, Pinus strobus. One way you can tell the pines from each other is differences in the number of needles that are bundled together. So this one has bundles of 5. And what I'm highlighting for you right now are some male cones. Cones that would be producing and distributing pollen. So often something you maybe overlook is the pollination process of pine trees. These look like they're about done, but this is another one big source of pollen allergies, and also at the right time of year in the right places, you get that kind of yellow coating over lakes, sometimes on your car. Just abundant pollen produced by these plants. And just to finish up the white pine here, this is a white pine cone from the previous year. They're the longer pine cones, so put my hand in here for a scale. Pretty long, narrow pine cones, still woody. And I'm in a little grove of pine trees here, possibly planted intentionally. This is a plant I quite like in the mint family. This is called motherwort, Leonurus cardiaca. And it's got some deeply lobed leaves. The mint family, again, has us with opposite leaves. So here we've got 2 leaves opposite. These are some shoots growing out of the axillary buds. They're very, very square stem. And then some pretty deeply toothed, lobed leaves. Mint family, if you crush these up, they have a nice smell, or at least a mint family kind of smell. And then the flowers up here are in verticils. So clusters of flowers toward the top of the stem, in the axils or around the axils of leaves. And rather like other flowers in the mint family, bilaterally symmetrical, that kind of 2-lipped appearance. And then they develop later. We probably won't see any here, but they develop into nutlets. Maybe we'll get a chance to show you those later in the course.